Those of you following along with this E30 build have probably been cringing as I fit more things up to the car that are going to prevent me from fitting a shift linkage to the gearbox. The more stuff I fit up, such as the exhaust and the various heat shields, the less room I have to fit one of these gear linkages onto the gearbox, and it's tight as it is. The reason I've left it until now is because this shifter linkage, which is the original one that came with the car, isn't going to work on this build without modification, and I wasn't really sure what modification it required. Let me give you a little bit of context on that. With the M52 engine now fitted into the E30, paired with the 318IS Getrag g240 gearbox, it's clear to see that the transmission is pushed considerably further back, deeper into the transmission tunnel, meaning this shifter linkage is just too long, and it would sit probably around here, and the gear lever will not line up with the hole that it needs to come through to be accessed from inside the cab. It's unfortunate, but there are a couple of ways to solve this problem. The first way would be to use what you've got and start with this shifter arm and selector rod, chop a section out of both and somehow stick them back together. The exact amount that you'd need to chop out does seem to vary from my research online. Some people are saying 2 centimetres, but to me it'd look like it'd need a bit more than 2 centimetres taken out for it to fit in this case. I suspect the variance in how much you need to chop will come down to things like which engine mounts you're using and that kind of thing, which could put the M50 M52 engine in a slightly different position in the engine bay. In mine, the engine is sat right up to the bulkhead, almost touching it in fact. The actual procedure for modifying this shifter linkage seems fairly straightforward to me. The first thing you'd need to do really is work out exactly how much to take out. My recommendation on that would be to remove the shift lever, to fit the shifting arm onto the gearbox with its clip, and then look from the top to see how lined up this circular part is with the circular hole that's in the transmission tunnel. And then you can mark where you'd want the lever to be. Obviously the lever would be central in this, and then you would have a measurement of exactly how much you need to chop out of the central part of the selector rod and the shifting arm. Once you are certain about the amount of length you need to take out of the arm and the rod, then what you'd want to do is mark it up, preferably in the middle where it's less shapely on both parts, and then you could chop it and jig it, for example, in a vise. And with the selector arm, life's really nice and easy because it's simply steel and you just weld it back together. But the difficulty comes with the shifting arm because it's actually made of cast aluminium. And I don't know about you, but welding aluminium is pretty specialist and not something I can do here. As an alternative to the aluminium welding idea, I have heard of people creating a little bracket and drilling a few holes in this shifting arm and putting some rivets through, which kind of reconnect it back together with a bit of steel plate. My problem with that is I feel like it could turn into Frankenstein's monster very quickly, and it definitely wouldn't be as rigid as it was as a solid piece of aluminium. And as I'm after a positive shift feel in this car, I just feel adding slop into this shifting arm is just a mistake, and one that's probably going to take a lot of effort to make too. After I'd spent some time thinking about it and researching and working out how I could make a substantial enough bracket, I decided to discount idea 1 in favour of idea 2, which I'll show you now. So this is my option 2, and it's actually a shifter linkage from a 320i. So strangely enough, the 320i E30 came equipped with a 240 gearbox despite having the 6-pot M20 engine. So effectively the same type of gearbox as the one I'm using here with some slightly different ratios. However, with the M20 engine being a 6-pot, it also pushes the Getrag g240 gearbox deeper into the transmission tunnel, the same amount as I suspect my M52 has. So theoretically this should be a perfect OE fit up. There is actually quite a significant difference in the length here. If I just hold these both up, this one's quite a bit sloppier so it wants to fall about. But you can see that it's quite a lot more than 2 centimetres shorter, and from eye it looks like this one should fit to me, but there's only one way to find out really, and that's to fit it up. I will actually tell you the difference in length between these two in a minute, but you might want to watch to the end of the video just to confirm this really does work, because we don't really know what's going to happen yet because I haven't tried this before. But it's a really great opportunity for me to talk to you about shift levers as well. So let's move these to the bench so I can discuss that. It turns out I'm actually glad I deliberated on chopping this 316i shifter linkage, and I waited for this 320i linkage to come available for sale. I actually picked it up on eBay, and it looked like it was a bit more than I wanted to pay, to be honest, which was disappointing. But when I studied the pictures more closely, I spotted that it comes with an upgraded gear lever, which is a different modification I was planning to do, which is a real bonus, because I don't think the seller actually realised that it was any different to a standard E30 gear linkage, because it wasn't mentioned in the description anywhere. So I guess it was one of those very rare occasions where obscure and detailed BMW knowledge actually came in useful and saved me some money. Now, before I get the shifter linkage under the car and try and wrestle it onto the gearbox to see if it really does fit and is the correct length, I should talk a little bit more about the levers, because it's a great opportunity to now while you can see both of these next to each other. I'm pretty sure this gear lever that's turned up on this 320i linkage is from a Z3 1.9 litre, a 4-pot Z3. It's a very commonly recommended upgrade part to enhance the shift feel on an E30. There are actually a few different shifter options for an upgrade that are commonly recommended, and you often hear of people using much more aggressive shifters, ones from the Z3M or the Z4 3 litre. But this Z3 1.9 litre is generally known as the best compromise. It's not too notchy, but it's a significantly shorter throw. There's actually a really good article on this on the E30's own wiki, but I'll give you the lowdown on it just now. If you compare this Z3 1.9 lever to the original E30 one, there are two key differences to note. The most obvious thing you're going to want to look at is the height of the lever. The Z3 lever is about 1 centimetre shorter on the top side than the original E30 one. This means the gear knob will sit slightly lower in the car, which actually isn't something I specifically want. It's kind of down to personal preference, that, and for me I think I'd want the gear lever to be quite close to the steering wheel so I can change gear without really needing to take my eye off the road. But with a shorter length at the top, it does contribute slightly to a shorter throw. Less obvious at first glance, but actually by far the most important part, is the difference in the length of the rod below the ball. You can see here that the rod below the ball on the Z3 shifter is considerably longer than on the original E30 shifter. It's the additional length here that increases the leverage you have when moving the top, effectively changing the ratio of how much you need to move the top of the lever to get movement at the bottom. So you need to move the top of the gear lever less to switch between gears using the bottom, thus reducing the throw at the top. It's a great opportunity to do this upgrade now because it's super fiddly to do in situ, which I do know from experience because I've changed it on an E46 before, which is effectively the same job. It's a shame I can't show you a before and after on actually how long the throw is, but I can tell you the shift on the E30 as it was as a 316 when it was using this linkage was more like something you'd expect to find on a London double-decker bus than something you'd expect to find on a retro sports car. This lever should really sharpen it up, but without taking away from the analogue, sporty, retro feel that I am actually trying to get from this E30. Before I go ahead and start battling to fit this shifter arm, I'm going to take the opportunity to switch out the main pivot ball bushing on the arm, which is this thing here where the ball of the shifter sits in. You can do this in situ, but again it's very fiddly, so I'm going to do it now. Hopefully I don't change my mind about changing any of the other bushings, which I'm leaving as rubber. Oh yeah, before I forget, I'm going to actually tell you the difference in the lengths here. So from about the centre point on this circular part to the rubber bushing in the centre here, that's 32-ish. And on the 320i one, it's more like 26, I'd say, which is 6 centimetres shorter. So potentially you could chop 6 centimetres out of this and the shifter rod and end up with the same result as you would have by changing to a 320i one. So if you're feeling brave, you might want to take that on yourself. To switch this pivot ball bushing, I'm making the name up, hopefully it's correct, should be fairly straightforward actually. I have done one of these before. First thing I need to do is take off the selector rod by taking this clip out, and then hopefully I can get the bushing to spin around inside here, and once it's spun around and these tabs are no longer captured, it should pop out upwards, and then I can take it off and put the new one on. Simple as that. And with that done, the lever feels smooth but firm. To be honest, the original one felt pretty decent, but you know, whilst I'm in there, it seemed to make sense. This is an example of a worn one. Loose as anything, that. If I sell this one, I might do the next guy a favour by sticking this one in, because like I say, it wasn't too bad, but hey ho. Okay, so I've brought in the Getrag g240 box that was original to this 316i, so I can actually show you how this goes together. As I mentioned earlier, whilst I am using a Getrag g240 box on this car, I'm using a 318IS box, which is currently fitted up with the M52. So I'm just using this as a mock example. So this rubber bushing is actually the gearbox side of the shifter linkage, and it needs to sit in here and be locked in with this clip. Now, bear in mind that this is sandwiched underneath the transmission tunnel, really difficult to get to with it in situ. So I'm expecting this to be the most difficult part of the job by far, and it's notorious, lots of people struggle with this. But as I've got this gearbox off the car in this clip, I can show you how it actually works now. So it needs to go through there like this, all the way through, and this needs to push down to clip over, and it's even difficult without anything in the way. It needs to clip over like that and lock on. If you're doing this job with a car that has a gearbox in situ as well, this is going to be a definite pain in the arse, and you'll need to pry it off with a screwdriver. The selector rod connects to the selector rod inside the gearbox, so this is actually what changes the gears. Now, there is a coupler which has an end similar looking to this one, which attaches to this, and the gearbox on the car has the coupler on it. This one doesn't, because I've harvested it for the other one. So this rod would poke through that coupler, you'd put the clip on, and then your lever should enable you to change the gears in the box. Lastly, there's the bushing that goes on the other end. Now this little bracket bolts onto the underside of the car. There's a little hanger for this, and it's just a rubber bushing that pushes on like that, and it just holds this end of the shifter arm in position, but with a little bit of play. So now I've shown you how all of this connects up to the gearbox and to the car. I'm going to whip it off this old gearbox and let's offer it up to the car and see if I'm actually correct about the distance. So in order to do this whilst the gearbox is in the car, what I've done is I've taken off the guibo that sits on the output shaft from the gearbox just to give myself a bit more room to get my arms in. And I've also taken off the nuts that hold on the gearbox support. And that's allowed the gearbox, the back of the gearbox, to drop down only about 1 centimetre, but it just gives a little bit more room, which it turns out is quite important because to get this clip on top of the gearbox, you need a bit more clearance so that the clip can go on and then close. So dropping it 1 centimetre does give enough clearance. I've done a bit of a test to make sure. So now I've done that, I can actually start trying to fiddle my way into getting this gear shift arm on. Strange that this bar on the end of this selector rod at the gearbox side was a bit long, so I've had to add a bit of a stack of washers just to shim it so it's nice and tight and I can get the clip on without this rod being able to move left and right. I want it to be held firm, which it now is, but a strange curiosity. Well, it's looking good. Bloody hell, we've even got gears. That 318IS box wasn't empty after all. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and even reverse. Full house. So the shifter arm looks to be dead central on the hole in the transmission tunnel, which I'm really pleased about. So it turns out the 320i shifter arm is the perfect size for this application. Now the lever looks like it's slightly over to the right, which is kind of strange, although perfectly central on this plane. I'm hoping it's just because the gearbox is kind of hanging at the moment, so it's not bolted up properly. Hopefully when it's bolted up properly it'll centralise it. Either that or my perspective's just a bit off because there's no seats, so it's hard to know what would be right when you were in the driving position. So before I get back underneath and start trying to bolt that gearbox back into its place, I'm going to just put this rubber grommet on, which I suppose just keeps the elements out. Hopefully it's going to be nice and easy to put back in from the top. It looks like it should be fairly straightforward. The wiring is actually for the reversing light switch, so I'll have to route that from the bottom. There's a little arrow on it which tells you which way it goes, because obviously there's holes for the wiring in specific spots. Right, that's the reversing light switch wired on. Now this gearbox support. So that's the reversing light wiring plugged back in, the gearbox tightened back up into its place, the grommet located properly, and I've even put the guibo back on, ready to receive a prop shaft. A quick note to add is I've opted to remove this vibration dampener. It's quite a heavy thing and it goes onto the output shaft of the gearbox. Anyway, as a nice little end to the video, I'm going to stick this gator and this knob back on, preferably the right way around. There you go. I'm over the moon that the car has gears again. That's another big step forward, which I'm really pleased about. It's always super fiddly messing about with the gear linkage on a BMW or probably any car, especially when the gearbox is in situ. It's a bit of a nightmare and I kind of wish I'd have done it before, but things don't always fall into place like that. Either way, hopefully there's been some useful information in this video if you're doing a similar job that involves the shifter linkage. So if it's helped you out, please do remember to give us a like. Coming up next is going to be the prop shaft. So I've got the prop shaft back. You may have seen in the background I've got 3 prop shafts, so I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail about prop shaft options in the next video, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. For those of you screaming at the screen about how off to the front right this gear lever was, I've just been underneath the car, taken off the clip, taken out the shifter linkage, span this 180 degrees round so the exact opposite way, and connected it all back up with the clip. Let's see if that's just sorted the problem. I'm expecting it will have. And it has. Seems so obvious now. Perfect.